You are standing in your kitchen, scraping the last of dinner off a plate into the trash, and you don't even think about it. It's automatic. It's nothing. But economists at Penn State actually measured what nothing costs. They tracked real households, real refrigerators, real grocery receipts, and they found that the average American family throws away almost a third of the food it buys. Not the food that goes bad in some abstract sense. Food that was purchased, paid for, and never eaten. The number they put on it was $240 billion a year nationwide. Divided across every household in the country, that is close to $1,900 per family every single year thrown directly into a landfill. And here's the part that should stop you. Your grandparents lived through a time when food was harder to get, harder to afford, and harder to replace than at any point in the last 100 years. The Great Depression, rationing during World War II. And yet study after study on food waste today points to one simple, almost embarrassing conclusion. Your grandmother, on a fraction of your income, wasted almost nothing. You, with a refrigerator, a car, and a grocery store 6 minutes away, are the one who cannot make it through a bag of lettuce before it turns to soup in the drawer. That is not a coincidence. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why, including one piece of printed information on your food packaging, something you check almost every time you open the fridge, that researchers at Harvard and the Natural Resources Defense Council proved is quietly training you to throw away food that is still completely fine to eat. Here's where it starts. Most people assume food waste is about laziness or carelessness or just not caring enough. It isn't. 9 out of 10 Americans, according to a Food Marketing Institute survey cited in that Harvard and NRDC report, throw food away because they misread the date printed on the package. They see sale by, or best by, or use by, and they treat it as a safety deadline, an expiration, a line where food turns from good to dangerous overnight. It is not that. For almost every product on your shelf, that date has nothing to do with safety at all. It is a manufacturer's private estimate of peak flavor. And in most states, nobody regulates it, nobody standardizes it, and nobody requires it to mean the same thing from one brand to the next. Your yogurt is not a ticking clock. It is a guess, printed by a company that has zero financial incentive to encourage you to keep eating what you already bought. That is the mechanism, not carelessness. A tiny printed number, treated as gospel, quietly convincing tens of millions of households to throw away food that is still perfectly good, week after week, without anyone ever questioning it. Your grandmother never had that number to obey, because for most of her life, hardly any food had one. So she developed something else instead, a system that did not live on a label. It lived in her hands, her nose, and her eyes. She picked up the bread and pressed it. She smelled the milk before she poured it. She looked at the vegetable, not the calendar. If it looked fine, smelled fine, and tasted fine, it was fine. That instinct did not come from a nutrition class. It came from a childhood where wasting food was not an inconvenience. It was something closer to a small moral failure. That mindset was built during the Great Depression, when one bad month could mean an empty table. And it was reinforced during World War II, when the government itself was rationing sugar, meat, and butter with paper stamps. And what most people forget is what families did to fill the gap. Between 1943 and 1944, roughly 20 million American households planted what were called victory gardens, in backyards, empty lots, even window boxes in apartment buildings. Those gardens produced close to 40% of all the fresh vegetables consumed in the entire country. 40% from families growing their own food out of necessity. That generation did not think of a garden as a hobby.
They thought of it as insurance. And that same resourcefulness followed them straight into the kitchen for the rest of their lives, long after rationing ended. That little can kept next to the stove was not clutter. It was strained bacon grease, saved for weeks, because fat meant flavor, and flavor was not something you threw away. Stale bread did not go
in the trash. It became bread pudding or French toast, or was toasted and crumbled over vegetables. The water left over from boiling potatoes or green beans became the base for tomorrow's soup. Vegetable peels and eggshells went to a compost pile that fed a garden, and whatever the family could not eat went to the chickens, who paid the family back in eggs. Nothing left that kitchen with a job still left undone. By the 1960s and 70s, many of these families were not poor anymore. They could afford to waste food. They still didn't, because somewhere along the way, the habit stopped being about survival and became about respect for the work, for the money, for the meal itself.
Now, here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because it is not really about grandparents anymore. It is about who benefits from you forgetting what she knew. The average American household visits the grocery store roughly once or twice a week, and almost every part of that experience is engineered to make you buy more than you need. Bulk pricing that only saves money if you actually use the extra volume before it spoils. Buy one, get one offers on perishables that quietly assume half of what you take home will hit the trash. Family-size packaging built around a family size that stopped existing decades ago. Nobody along that chain, from the manufacturer to the retailer, loses a single dollar when food rots in your refrigerator. The loss is entirely yours, and it happens quietly enough that you never connect it to your grocery bill. So here is the system. And unlike almost everything in this video industry pushes on you, it costs nothing. First, stop treating the date on the package as a verdict. For the vast majority of shelf-stable and fresh food, your senses are more accurate than a manufacturer's guess. Use your judgment carefully with dairy, deli meats, and anything clearly labeled for food safety. But for everything else, look, smell, and taste before you trust a stamp with no legal definition behind it. Second, put the oldest food where you will actually
see it. Grandmother's rule was first in, first out. And it still works, because visibility is the whole battle. Food does not get wasted because people are careless. It gets wasted because it disappears into the back of a drawer and loses the fight against everything newer stacked in front of it. Third, plan around what is already about to turn, not around what looks appealing at the store. Before you shop, look at what is closest to the edge in your kitchen and build tonight's dinner around it. That single habit alone is responsible for a meaningful share of the difference between a household that wastes 30% of its food and one that wastes almost none. Fourth, bring back the container that never dies. Vegetable scraps, bones, and peels do not belong in the trash. They belong in a bag in the freezer, building toward a pot of stock that cost you nothing but time you were already spending in the kitchen. None of that requires a root cellar or a flock of chickens in your backyard. It requires exactly what it required in 1943, attention instead of a printed number doing your thinking for you. And this pattern goes back much further than your grandmother, further than rationing, further than the Depression. Long before refrigeration existed, root cellars kept vegetables alive through entire winters using nothing but cool, still earth. The Romans preserved meat and fish in salt for months at a time. Fermentation kept cabbage, milk, and grain edible across seasons in nearly every culture on Earth, from Korea to Scandinavia to the American frontier. None of that was cuisine for its own sake. It was survival technology, refined over thousands of years, because throwing away food was never something any civilization before ours could afford to treat casually. Your grandmother did not invent that wisdom. She inherited it from people who had even less room for error than she did, and she passed it down the only way it has ever survived, by doing it in front of you, in a kitchen, without ever writing it down. So the next time you are standing over the trash can with something in your hand that is a day past a date nobody regulated, stop for 1 second. Smell it. Look at it. Ask yourself what she would have done. There's a very good chance the answer is nothing close to what you were about to do. If this brought back a memory, tell me about it in the comments. I want to know what your grandmother never let go to waste. And subscribe, because the next story we uncover about what that generation knew that we forgot is even bigger than this one.